My wife said, "Real men don't care if their women party with their boss." I replied, "Then go find yourself a real man." The next day, I accepted the job across the country she said I'd never get. When she texted, "Come home tonight," I sent back a photo of my new penthouse view. That is how it started. Not with a shout, not with papers served, but with a tired, quiet exchange in the middle of our $7.2 million home in Charlotte, North Carolina. A home that was, to everyone else, the perfect picture of success. I was Samuel Mercer, 41 years old, the chief financial officer for a reliable, if slightly dull, advertising firm. I had a wife, Audrey, the brilliant and ruthless chief executive officer of a huge tech company. We had been married for 17 years. We had 2 teenagers, Jonah, who was 17, and May, who was 15. From the outside, we were the definition of power and stability. The calm before a storm that only I could feel brewing. But what was real and what merely appeared to be real were, as I was rapidly discovering, 2 worlds apart. The unease had begun subtly, creeping in like the evening fog. Audrey had been distant for months. Her late nights, once a rarity during crucial deal periods, had become the norm. I told myself it was the stress of being a chief executive officer. I told myself it was the demands of a billion-dollar company. I clung to the belief that my secure, predictable domestic life was the bedrock we both relied on, even if I had to swallow my own professional ambitions after a failure years ago. My worth, I believed, was tied to maintaining this perfect, unchallenged stability. One Tuesday night, I was working late in my home office, reviewing budget forecasts. A comforting task, predictable and contained. My mind was wrestling with a complex liquidity problem when my phone buzzed. It was Audrey. Working late. Don't wait up. It was the usual, the exact same 3 sentences she always sent. But that night, the words felt brittle, like thin glass. I put the phone down on the mahogany desk and stared at the glowing screen for a long, agonizing moment. The silence in the house, usually a comfort after the kids were asleep, now felt suffocating. Where was she? What was she doing? The nagging suspicion I had fought to suppress for months began to claw its way out. Her explanations for the delays were becoming more rehearsed, her eyes more evasive at breakfast. I had spent so long telling myself that reliance was a strength, that not challenging her meant keeping the peace. But now, the cost of that peace felt too high. The following morning, during a rushed breakfast, the facade cracked wide open. Audrey was edgy, her attention perpetually fixed on her phone. I asked how the quarterly initiative was going, and she mumbled a quick, vague reply without looking up. Our 15-year-old May noticed it too. She looked from her mother's distracted face to mine, a frown tightening her brow. "Dad, why does Mom keep coming home after we are asleep?" Jonah heard she was having dinner with Mr. Vivien again. Vivien. The name hit me not like a sledgehammer, but like a precise, freezing needle to the gut. Vivien Delacroix was Audrey's new, impossibly young, and aggressively confident executive assistant. Vivien was always there in the company photos, standing right behind Audrey in the annual reports, and managing every key decision. I knew of him, of course. He was the perfect professional. I tried to brush it off, telling May, "She's just helping with a major account, sweetie. Long hours." But deep down, the reassurance was hollow. The feeling that something was irrevocably wrong, something far darker than mere long hours, stirred and solidified. I couldn't shake the image of Vivien, always by her side, always competent, always present in the spaces I was never invited to occupy. My suppressed ambition, My old wound of professional failure throbbed with the fear that Audrey had found someone she deemed worthy of her time. Someone who wouldn't just stay home and be the stable chief financial officer of a small firm. The late nights continued, stretching past midnight into the early hours of the morning. Audrey's excuses grew thin, transparent. The tension in our large, silent house became a living, breathing thing that Jonah and May couldn't help but sense. I realized then that my mission to maintain the perfect life for them was failing. The silence was now louder than any argument. I had to know the truth. I had to face the possibility that my world, the one I had built my security upon, was nothing but a lie. The morning after Audrey's dismissive, chilling words, I knew I could no longer trust my own denial. My stable life, my supposed safety net, was an illusion. My quiet reply to her, "Then go find yourself a real man," was the first time in years I had challenged her authority, and it tasted like fear and freedom simultaneously. My immediate step was to reach out to the one person who dealt in objective reality, not emotional conjecture. I called Marcus Hale, an old friend from college who now worked as a detective for the Charlotte Police Department. I trusted Marcus implicitly. He was dependable, thorough, and owed me a favor from a complex situation involving my father's estate years ago. "Marcus, I need your eyes on something private," I began, my voice deliberately neutral, professional. "It concerns Audrey's company. I suspect a major ethical breach, maybe financial misconduct, and I need a second set of eyes to track movements outside the firm." I framed it as a corporate risk. I couldn't yet bring myself to voice the word affair, not even to my most trusted ally. That word was the nuclear option, the confirmation that would destroy the life I'd spent 2 decades building. Marcus, being a detective, heard the stress beneath the chief financial officer talk. He knew me too well to believe I was truly worried about a quarterly report. He simply said, "Send me the basic itinerary, Samuel. I'll see what I can pull up discreetly." In the meantime, I began my own subtle surveillance. I went through Audrey's minimal expense reports, the ones that didn't go directly through the corporate credit line, but were routed through a secondary company card. I reviewed her public-facing travel dates and checked them against the few calendar entries I still had access to. The inconsistencies were minor at first. A dinner receipt for 2 people at a high-end French restaurant on a night she claimed to have been in a virtual board meeting. A suspiciously long layover in Chicago that was not reflected in the flight itinerary. The common denominator, always and frustratingly, was Vivien. Vivien's name appeared in the memo lines, the recipient fields, or the background of shared documents far more frequently than the average executive assistant should. It felt pathetic, picking through scraps of data like a scavenger. But every inconsistency fueled my growing certainty. It was the only way to combat my own deep-seated Lee, which kept whispering that I was overreacting, that I was merely jealous of her success, that I had to maintain the marriage for the sake of the children. The emotional strain was palpable within the walls of our beautiful home. The air felt heavy, charged with unspoken anxiety. One evening, I was helping May with a college essay when she looked up at me, her eyes mirroring my own exhaustion. "Is everything okay, Dad?" she asked, setting her pencil down. "It's just Mom is never here. And when she is, you two are so quiet. It's like being in a library all the time." Her words cut through me. The cost of maintaining the illusion was not peace. It was silence. I was supposed to be protecting them, yet all I was doing was preserving a facade. that was making us all miserable. My need to protect my children was suddenly stronger than my need to maintain my comfort. A few days later, just as I was spiraling into a pit of self-doubt and legal strategy planning, my phone vibrated with an unfamiliar number. It was Marcus. "I have something." "Samuel." His voice was tight, serious, the voice of a detective who knew he was delivering devastating news. "Last night, around 10 o'clock, I saw Audrey's black sport utility vehicle parked outside the Hilton Center downtown. She was with someone. They went inside, and from the way they were acting, it wasn't a business meeting. And Samuel, it was Vivien." The news hit me with a physical force, a sudden drop in my stomach, as if I had missed a step in the dark. The ground I had been standing on, the ground of a 17-year marriage, a shared home, a future, suddenly ceased to exist. It wasn't just vague suspicion anymore. It was fact. It was betrayal, delivered with the professional detachment of a police detective. I thanked Marcus woodenly, disconnected the call, and stood in the absolute silence of my office. No more pretending. No more excuses for Audrey. The shock rapidly cooled into a white, hot core of absolute resolve. I needed answers, and I needed the full, irrefutable truth. I was done being the passive, silent chief financial officer. Now, I was a man fighting for his dignity. The confirmation from Marcus had been the death blow to my delusion. I hadn't been overreacting. I had been willfully blind. The shame of being deceived was replaced by a cold, calculating resolve. If Audrey was going to treat our 17 years together as a corporate acquisition to be leveraged and discarded, then I would respond in the language I knew best: data and strategy. I dedicated the next few weeks to full investigation mode. My cozy home office, once a place of quiet, contained work, became a strategic command center. I wasn't just tracking Audrey now. I was tracking Vivien too. I instructed Marcus to focus solely on the paper trail, because ultimately, paper betrayed everyone. We cross-referenced expense reports with public transportation logs, calendar metadata, and even the timestamps on company keycard access at non-headquarters locations. The inconsistencies piled up into a mountain of evidence. What had been work dinners were revealed as meticulously planned, recurring late-night rendezvous. Vivien's name was not just on the receipts. It was linked to the booking confirmation for a corporate suite used on non-travel days. Then came the final, irrefutable truth. Marcus called me again, his voice now sounding genuinely sorry for what he had to deliver. "Samuel, I found something important. It's not just a dinner or two. Vivien and Audrey have been booking rooms at the downtown Charlotte Hyatt for the past 3 weeks. Not intermittently. 3 weeks, consistent use. It's not just business, Samuel. It's a second life." That revelation hit me with icy clarity. It wasn't a mistake, a moment of weakness, or a complicated business trip. It was a calculated, sustained, parallel life. I sat at my desk, staring at the blank screen, the silence deafening. Yet, somehow, I felt strangely light. The heavy weight of denial I had carried for months finally lifted, replaced by the steely knowledge that I had the truth, and the truth gave me power. I started digging deeper into Audrey's tech company finances, knowing that an ethical breach often preceded or mirrored a personal one. Using my chief financial officer acumen, I focused on discretionary spending that bypassed standard reporting channels. I discovered minor anomalies, high-end gifts charged as client appreciation, and expense reimbursements to Vivien that were far in excess of the typical limits. Slept, sometimes, routed through a small shell company I recognized as belonging to a major competitor's vendor. It was clear that the affair wasn't just personal, it had blurred lines into professional and financial misconduct, creating a significant corporate liability. This was no longer just about my marriage, it was about justice. Just as I finished compiling the financial evidence, an unexpected email arrived. It was from the chief executive officer of a major San Francisco-based financial technology company. 2 months prior, I had interviewed with them for a chief financial officer role, a role Audrey had strongly discouraged me from pursuing, saying it was too high risk and a step above your reliable sweet spot. The job would require a cross-country move and return to the high-stakes world I had retreated from years ago after my public professional failure. The email offered me the job, complete with a salary package of nearly $300,000, more than my current one. Audrey's voice, dismissive and patronizing, echoed in my memory. A step above your reliable sweet spot. Too high risk. She had been so sure I would remain the safe, predictable husband. The man whose professional life was manageable enough to leave her own ambition unchallenged. I didn't hesitate. I didn't call Audrey to discuss it. I didn't even call my current boss to give notice. I immediately accepted the job. The move was across the country, 2,400 miles away, and it represented everything Audrey thought I was incapable of achieving. I closed my laptop, the hard drive filled with the devastating truths about my wife's sustained betrayal and professional risk. I had the facts, the power, and now, the escape route. The internal decision was made. I would stop clinging to the stability of a broken home and start fighting for my own suppressed potential. It was time for the final, devastating confrontation. I hadn't slept, but I wasn't tired. I felt strangely energized, fueled by the cold clarity of the past few weeks and the knowledge of the San Francisco job offer, which was my lifeline. The moment had arrived. The confrontation had to happen before I left, and it had to be clean, decisive, and final. I heard the front door open just before dawn. Audrey walked in, looking immaculate as always, but moving with a subtle, hurried guilt I had never noticed before. Her high-powered chief executive officer mask was slipping, revealing something brittle beneath. I met her in the primary bedroom. The curtains were still drawn, making the large, luxurious room feel oppressive. I had laid everything out on the king-sized bed, meticulously arranged like exhibits in a courtroom. The hotel receipts from the Hyatt, printed emails referencing non-existent late-night meetings, and the financial spreadsheets highlighting the suspicious expense reimbursements for Vivien. She froze the moment she saw the papers. Her eyes, usually so sharp and calculating, went wide with shock. "Samuel, what is this?" she demanded, her voice low and dangerous. I looked straight at her, no longer the timid husband who had swallowed his ambition and his suspicions for years. My voice was steady, utterly devoid of the emotion that was churning in my chest. "Audrey, I know what you have been doing with Vivien. The late dinners, the business trips that don't add up, the 3 weeks of consistent room bookings downtown." I pointed to the papers. "I know everything." She rushed forward, grabbing a stack of receipts, pretending to scan them for explanation. "Samuel, you don't understand. It's just work. That's all. You're blowing this out of proportion. Vivien is my assistant. That's it." She was rushing the words, but the lie was so clearly visible on her face. "No, Audrey. This isn't work. This is betrayal, financial misconduct, and a deeply cynical abandonment of our marriage." My voice cut through the thick, desperate air between us. The pain coursed through me, but it was anchored by a steel, like strength I hadn't known I possessed. What have you done to us? You left me here, alone with our children, while you ran off with him. In that moment, all the buried emotions, the quiet suffering, the years of feeling minimized by her success, the agony of watching our children sense the instability, exploded. I wasn't the quiet chief financial officer anymore. I wasn't the silent, supportive husband. I was at my breaking point, and I refused to yield. The initial bewilderment faded from Audrey's face, replaced by a wave of furious, entitled anger. Her jaw clenched, and her eyes narrowed. You don't get it, do you? I've been working my ass off for this family. You think I don't care? You are making a huge mistake, Samuel. Her voice was sharp, accusatory. You're the one who pulled back. You were content to stay small in that dead-end job, while I was out building an empire. We both had our reasons. You are the one who made the mistake. Audrey, you chose him. You chose to abandon us, and now you have to face the consequences. I stood taller, refusing to be intimidated by the rage I had lived under the shadow of for years. I don't care about your excuses. This isn't just about you and me. This is about who I am, and I'm done pretending to be okay with your lies. Her face was incandescent with fury, a frightening mask of entitlement. You think you can destroy me. You think I won't fight back. She spat the words like venom. I'll ruin your career in Charlotte. I'll make sure you regret this. You have nothing without me. I stared at her, unblinking, my resolve hardening into diamond, like strength. Her threats, once terrifying because they touched upon my deepest professional wound, the fear of public failure, now felt pathetic. You don't scare me, Audrey. You don't scare me anymore. In that instant, I knew the fight was no longer about saving the marriage. It was about defining my own life, reclaiming the power and ambition I had suppressed for years. I was not going to let my future be dictated by her betrayal or her threats. If losing her meant finding myself, then so be it. The marriage had become a game built on her lies, and I had just walked off the board. I walked out of the house that morning, and never looked back. The confrontation with Audrey had been agonizing, but it cleared the air, giving me the stark clarity of a surgical incision. Her threats to ruin my career were the last, pathetic gasps of a person who knew she was losing control. The shame I had carried from my past, professional failure, was finally eclipsed by the certainty of her betrayal. I had accepted the chief financial officer job in San Francisco. Now, it was time to own that decision. I caught the red-eye flight, leaving behind the suffocating atmosphere of Charlotte for the sharp, competitive air of the West Coast. Landing in San Francisco felt like stepping onto a different planet. The scale of the city, the sheer density of ambition in the air, was intoxicating. I went straight to the luxury apartment the new firm had arranged, a temporary rental in a high-rise downtown. It was minimalist, modern, and gloriously anonymous. It was mine. The immediate relief was immense, but the tactical part of my plan still required execution. I spent my first 2 days in the new city, not setting up my office, but finalizing my revenge. I didn't want money or a drawn-out legal fight. I wanted justice. And more importantly, I wanted Audrey and Vivien to face the professional consequences of their calculated arrogance. They believed their affair was hidden. I was about to prove that a professional lie always unravels the personal one. I sat down with the dossier of evidence I had carried across the country, the hotel receipts, the financial anomalies, the emails proving misspent corporate funds. I wasn't going to send this information to Audrey's board. That would be too quick, too clean, and too easily dismissed as a disgruntled husband's smear campaign. Instead, I focused on Vivien's external sphere of influence. Vivien had cultivated relationships with 3 of Audrey's company's largest, most ethically stringent clients, acting as the primary point of contact. I drafted 3 separate, devastatingly professional emails. They contained no emotion, no personal accusations, only facts. They detailed the ethical violations, the use of corporate funds for the affair, the repeated misrepresentation of travel and meeting times, and the clear conflict of interest. I framed it as a serious liability issue, a cancer that could spread to their accounts. Before hitting send, I paused, staring at the screen. This was it. This action would destroy Vivien's professional life and cripple Audrey's firm through client attrition. It was irreversible. But then I remembered Audrey's entitlement, her cold dismissal of my worth, and her threats to ruin me. I pressed send. The silence that followed was heavy with consequence. The text from Audrey started almost immediately after the 3rd email hit its target. They began with confusion, shifted to frantic attempts at reconciliation, and quickly devolved into rage. "Samuel, what are you doing? This is insane. You're making a mistake. Come home, we can talk." I ignored them. I was busy staring out the window, watching the San Francisco fog roll over the skyscrapers. Her next round of texts were sharp and accusatory, echoing her final words in Charlotte. "You're ruining everything. You have no idea what you're doing. You think you can just tear this all down. I'll make sure you pay for this." I didn't flinch. Her words, once so potent, now had the hollow ring of impotence. She was trying to fight a financial audit with emotional manipulation, and I was immune. Then came the final, single text, hours later, laced with a strange mixture of command and longing, a final attempt to reclaim the life she had destroyed, but felt entitled to keep. "Come home tonight. We can fix this." I looked out at the glittering, vast city spread beneath me. I pulled out my phone, stepped over to the floor, to ceiling windows, and took a photo. It was a spectacular view, the high-rise towers, the bridge in the distance, the sheer scale of the new life I had claimed for myself. I attached the image to the message thread. I hit send. That was the end of the marriage. My professional success, the life she had told me I was too weak and too scared to pursue, was the final, non-verbal declaration of independence. The emotional anchor was cut, and I felt the exhilarating terror of floating free. The silence after that text was permanent. The photo of the San Francisco skyline, sent without a word, was the bomb blast that took down the bridge between us. After that, the texts from Audrey stopped. For a few days, I had peace, a glorious, unnerving silence. I was focused on my new role, diving into the high-stakes world of finance I had deliberately avoided for a decade. Slept. But I knew the professional fallout in Charlotte was far from over. The silence broke when my phone started lighting up with calls and encrypted messages from former colleagues and contacts in the industry. People who didn't want their names attached to gossip. The word was that Audrey's company was hemorrhaging major contracts. My strategically placed emails to Vivien's high-value clients had achieved their purpose. The ethical liability was too significant for them to ignore. And the cancellations were swift and brutal. I felt a cold sense of satisfaction, a vindication that was both deserved and deeply tainted with sadness over what we had lost. Audrey, backed into a corner, reacted exactly as the self-preserving chief executive officer would. She tried to make Vivien the scapegoat. The narrative started circulating that the assistant was solely responsible for the financial misconduct, a rogue employee exploiting the generosity of the chief executive officer. This, however, triggered Audrey's last, most personal, and most dangerous threat. As her professional world crumbled, she lashed out directly at my wound. The specific past trauma of my public career failure. She began subtly poisoning my old network in Charlotte, spreading rumors that I had left suddenly due to mental instability, that I was prone to paranoia, and that the allegations against her were the fantasies of a jealous, failing husband. The pressure mounted. I felt the familiar cold sweat of dread. This was the moment I had feared for 10 years. The public scrutiny, the professional whispers, the possibility that I would be dismissed as unstable. Exactly as she had predicted. My old lie, that security was paramount and ambition was dangerous, screamed in my ear. I was terrified I would fail again. Not just in my career, but in the eyes of my children. I had traded one prison for another, except this one had a higher salary. I was facing my ghost. I realized then that this was the final test. If I retreated now, if I allowed her threats to silence me, I would confirm my own weakness. I would validate every dismissive word she had ever spoken about my potential. I had to stand tall and fight, not just for the case, but for my own narrative. The turning point came late one evening. A call came through from Audrey, my new assistant in San Francisco. She was cautious, knowing the sensitivity of the situation. Mr. Mercer, an anonymous file was just encrypted and sent to my private line. It's marked urgent. Mercer internal. It looks like a final financial summary. I had her immediately decrypt and send it to me. It wasn't just a summary. It was the definitive proof I needed. The file contained internal ledger notations showing Audrey herself had authorized the transfer of tens of thousands of dollars from a company innovation fund to a private account used solely by Vivien for discretionary travel during the peak of their affair. It was the final, undeniable link between her chief executive officer conduct and the deception. She wasn't just covering up. She was actively diverting company funds for personal gain. This was no longer a domestic dispute, disguised as an ethical breach. It was corporate fraud. With this new, irrefutable evidence, I knew my leverage was absolute. Audrey's attempts to scapegoat Vivien and smear my reputation were irrelevant now. I didn't need to win a messy, public divorce battle. I needed to terminate her power permanently. I crafted one final, surgical email, not to a client, but to the three most powerful, non-executives on her board of directors. The subject line was succinct: evidence of fraudulent misappropriation of corporate funds and ethical breach, CEO Audrey Mercer. I attached the full dossier, including the new ledger file. The professional fallout would be total and immediate. I was finished being silent. I was finished being afraid. The email to the board was my final act of war. I had exhausted every avenue of confrontation and retaliation. And the silence from Charlotte was finally absolute. I knew that the fallout from the fraud evidence would be swift. Audrey would be out. The company would face an internal investigation. The structure she had used to shelter her deception would collapse. The professional battle was over. What remained was the quiet, cold process of emotional closure. I flew back to Charlotte a week later, not to return, but to pack, finalize the sale of the house, and handle the legal proceedings. My children, Jonah and May, were subdued but surprisingly accepting. Slept. They were old enough to understand the tension and the lies. And in a strange way, my decision to leave had removed the silent poison from their home. The first unexpected meeting came from Vivien. He had been effectively terminated from the company, his reputation destroyed, and his professional future in tech completely vaporized. He texted me desperate, asking to meet in person to explain. I agreed, choosing a sterile, upscale cafe near the city center, a place where everything looked perfect, but was utterly empty of real warmth. Vivien arrived looking impeccably dressed, but his eyes were haunted. He sat down, avoiding my gaze. I allowed the silence to stretch. Finally, he spoke, his voice thin. "Samuel, I need you to know, I didn't think things would get so complicated. It started as just work, and then, she convinced me. She said you didn't care, that you were just roommates." I leaned forward, cutting him off with a force that surprised even myself. "You lost control, didn't you? You didn't think, you simply chose to enable her. You chose this path, Vivien, and now you face the consequences. This isn't just about my marriage. This is about the ethics you violated, and the professional trust you destroyed." He looked up, and for a fleeting moment, I saw a flicker of genuine regret. But it was too late. I wasn't there to forgive or even argue. I was there to confirm my absolute detachment. I achieved the vindication I sought, seeing the arrogance crumble into self-pity. "I'm not going to let this end in silence," I stated firmly, my voice full of resolve. "I fought for too long to stay silent. You and Audrey made your choice, and now, you will both bear the weight of it." I left him there, amidst the clinking china and polite whispers of the perfect cafe. The meeting with Vivien marked the emotional turning point. I wasn't just reacting to betrayal. I was actively claiming my dignity. Next came the legal reality. I met with my lawyer and filed the final divorce papers. The decision had been made weeks ago, but signing the documents felt surreal. It was the official end to 17 years of shared history. The closing of a door I wasn't sure I ever wanted to open again. There was no relief or joy, just a profound, unsettling numbness. Later that day, as I was packing the last of my books, my phone buzzed. It was Audrey. "I know you sent that file to the board, Samuel. You've destroyed everything I built. You don't understand the situation I was in. You were never enough." The message was a final, desperate cocktail of accusation and self-pity. I walked over to the now empty walls of the house, the sun setting over the trees, bathing the dust motes in golden light. I remembered her scorn, her threats, and her final, entitled demand. "Come home tonight. We can fix this." I typed my reply. It was short, definitive, and final, echoing the words she had used against me years ago, now turned into my freedom mantra. "I'm where you said I could never be. I'm never coming back to you." That was it. The absolute end. I didn't wait for her reply. I put the phone on silent and stared at the empty space where the life we built used to be. The silence that followed was heavier than any words, but it held a fragile promise. My family was broken, but I had shown my children that standing up for yourself, even against overwhelming power, was the only way to be whole. I had finally learned the truth of my own worth, and it was time to step into the future I had fought for. The pain remained, but the shame, the greatest weight, was finally gone. The silence after I sent that final text was the sound of a door slamming shut. 2,400 miles away, I stood in the empty bedroom of what was once my marital home, feeling the heavy, unnerving peace of a man who had faced the worst and survived. I wasn't angry anymore, and the heartbreak was settling into a manageable scar. Slept. I had finally completed the painful process of dismantling the life I thought I was supposed to keep. A year passed. My life was now entirely contained within the sharp, glittering boundaries of San Francisco. I thrived in the new chief financial officer role, relishing the high-stakes strategy and the aggressive intellectual challenge. I was doing the work I loved. The work Audrey had convinced me was too dangerous for my reliable sweet spot. That professional failure from a decade ago, the one that had haunted me and kept me small, finally receded. It was replaced by success earned through sheer resilience. I often stood by the massive floor-to-ceiling window of my penthouse apartment, looking down at the shimmering grid of the city lights. This vast, dynamic cityscape had become the ultimate visual metaphor for my freedom. It wasn't a freedom from pain. The betrayal still stung, and the guilt over the children was a quiet ache. But it was a freedom to choose my own future, to define my own worth. I finally understood the core lie I had lived by for so long, that my worth and security were tied to the stability of my marriage and the comfort of my domestic life. I believed I had to be passive, predictable, and avoid challenge to be loved and secure. That belief was the real cage. The truth I learned in the aftermath was that true security does not come from reliance on another person or a stagnant situation. It comes from having the courage to set boundaries, to pursue my own potential, and to own my ambition. My worth was intrinsic, not conditional. My children, Jonah and May, were doing well. They spent time with me in San Francisco during holidays, and we had rebuilt our relationships on a new foundation of honesty and respect. The most important lesson I gave them wasn't stability, it was empowerment. I showed them that it is okay to walk away from things that are fundamentally broken, and that you never have to settle for less than your own dignity. I had spent so long trying to hold everything together for the sake of the family facade. But by fighting back, by choosing myself, I became a better father. I became whole. The road was far from easy. The divorce was finalized, clean and efficient, built on the undeniable evidence I had collected. Audrey's professional fall was complete. She resigned from her chief executive officer position shortly after I sent the final ledger to the board. Vivien was out of the industry entirely. Justice, in the professional sense, was served. But the real victory was internal. I was no longer the man who suffered in silence. I was the man who chose to step out of the shadow of someone else's lies and into the bright, unpredictable future of his own making. If you are listening to this, and if any part of this story resonates with that feeling of being stuck, that sense that you are living a life too small to contain your potential, remember this: you have the power to change it. You have the power to choose yourself. It won't happen overnight, and it won't be painless. But every decision you make toward reclaiming your independence is a step toward the life you deserve. You don't have to stay in the shadow of someone else's expectations. You are worth more than the compromises you have made. It is never too late to choose to step into your own power. This is not the end of the story. It is simply the end of the part where I was defined by betrayal. It is the beginning of the journey where I am finally defined by freedom. And I promise you, that journey is worth every single step.